Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Kimiko Gilmore, Assistant City Manager, here to talk to you about the ordinance that is before you today to offer temporary government-sponsored shelters. This piece of this ordinance will allow us to provide the shelters that you may have been hearing about for about 30 days now with the pallet shelters. It would allow temporary use for government-sponsored shelters, 60 to 130 square feet. This is just the 64 square feet would be the actual units that we would use that would house 2 people. So that would be 2 people within 64 square feet. There would be no cooking facilities, and the units would be marked for emergency services, and we did have some conversation with Chief Lake about that provision. They'll be set back a minimum of 10 feet from the right-of-way line and about 25 feet from any residentially zoned property if that was where they were located. The second section B, fencing would be required surrounding the site. There would need to be lighting to provide a safe and secure environment. There would be a common bathroom facility, so the bathrooms would not be located within that small unit, of course. There would be no cooking facilities, and there would be common areas for eating and meetings, and then 24-hour security. Sorry, I'm used to somebody else advancing my slides, so I apologize. Section C and D, there would I'd highlight that there would be no parking required in this configuration, and this would not exceed 1 year period of time. What you see here is an example of pallet shelters that are in other jurisdictions. This one is at the First Congregational United Church of Christ in Eugene, Oregon. The second is in Riverside Village Shelter. This is just another view of how they would be set up. This might not be exactly how we would align them, but this is just an example of how they can be aligned. This village is in Los Angeles. Of course, they did something a little bit more bold and bright, and they actually have tours that go around the community so they can see. There's also some other art in this particular facility. This is the potential site plan for what we are looking at with our Verge community. You can see here, we would have the shelters would be aligned around the perimeter and then also inside, creating a kind of community. Those 3 bigger buildings, those larger buildings would be those 100 square foot buildings that would have common areas for eating, office space, and then also for security. The larger, I'm sorry, I can't, let's see. These right here are the larger facilities, 100 square feet, and those we would like to have families in. These right here would be the mobile units for the bathrooms and shower facilities, and hopefully we would have more than one, depending on how many pallets we end up getting. And this parking lot, it seems a little bit permanent, but it's really not. It would be probably gravel. And that was the last part. I did want to try to show you. No, it's not going to. But if you would go to palletshelter.com, you would be able to see other municipalities, villages, and then there were a lot of different informational videos that are there as well. So this would only allow us to do these shelters and for a period of time for about a year. It would be in the continuum of what we are doing with the hotels. Some of those residents would go into these transitional houses with wraparound services and then transition out to more permanent housing. That would be the hope. So I can answer any questions now.
Got a quick question, then Ellington, and then Boo. So this adds a totally new subsection to our code.
Yes, sir.
So nowhere else in our code do we address temporary temporary housing, particularly for government.
Yeah, that's my understanding, yes.
All right, Councilman Ellington.
Yeah, just a couple brief questions.
Yes, sir.
And it kind of just follows off what our chair, Councilman Barnes, was just saying. It's a new section in here. So this new section only allows for 1-year permits, and then the permit grantee or recipient can no longer apply for that permit again?
I believe that there is a provision where you have to have a 30-day pause, and then you could,
Yeah.
yes, I was looking at.
Councilmember, yes.
Well,
It's
where's
a
the
permit.
30-day clause at? Because I don't see it in any of the sections in here, from temporary portable storage containers, the limits. So where's the 30-day renewal at? Just out of curiosity. I done read this like 3 times.
Councilmember, sorry, 8837008D,
883.
temporary government structure shelters for a period not to exceed 1 year. They're exempt from the requirements up in another section, 883037005, including
The time limit?
but limited to the requirement for a 30-day period between the expiration of the initial permit and the
Are you up in the time
extension
limit,
of the permit.
88370-5?
Yes, sorry.
What is this?
Yes.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Is this any exempt from the time, from the?
Well, I'm trying to make sure I'm reading the same one. 88370-5. So the only one that
It
expires
provides
temporary
for,
permanent use and other
typically, we
permit.
have a 30-day period between the time someone can.
But it only allows it for 30 days, so how can they keep rolling it over? If it says, upon expiration of temporary permit use, another permit for the
So,
same
yes, no, I'm sorry,
premises may
you're
be
right.
obtained for
So,
at
yes,
least.
we've waived, in this case, for the extension.
Where does it say that at, though? It only gives us the ability to, and it ain't a big issue. I'm just curious of where it says it at, because it only gives us the ability to extend it for at least 30 days, which would actually be a limitation on how much you can extend it for.
No, I think that the 30-day period talks about the time period between when a permit expires and when you can reapply for it. So that's how the 30-day periods work for most of for the temporary uses here.
Okay.
But I think actually I'm reading here, and I'll pivot to Kimiko, that temporary government shelters, they would be exempt from that requirement regarding the 30-day period between the expiration of the initial permit and the extension of the permit.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, yeah.
But back to your question, after the 1 year,
Yes.
does it state that
I
you
can't
can't?
I can't see it in here, man. So, see down here, down here.
I should have brought my code with me. Apologize.
Right, so it's exempting from the time limit piece. But how do you get back to, because I think what Councilman is saying is that you've got the 1 year time limit
Yes.
where you can, but you can't can't apply for that same spot again. Right?
Right. We're
What if it turns out that's the best location for those units?
That could be the case, and we're hoping to work through some of those issues as we're moving along. I mean, if we pass this, then we can start to work at other solutions. This is just the temporary fix for now, so we can get this going.
And I'm sorry.
And then my last question.
Mr. Chairman, if I can add to that, there is nothing prohibitive if this is a temporary use that lasts for a year and there's a decision for it to extend longer. There is the pathway for approval of these structures through our standard approval process, through a case that would be submitted to us. So I think that's the balance here is about temporary. Understand it was a period for a year. If you were extending beyond that period at a particular location and site, there would be the expectation that there be the more formalized process for approving those structures, because then in fact they might be there for a significant length of time.
And this is my last question, and that just brings me back to my concern too. So these, and it goes back to our code, nobody else will be able to do a temporary structure or apply, which goes to the permanent process or a regular procedural process, which could not exist because these are only government sponsored shelters by the title and language in here. So if
Correct.
the government is not sponsoring it, there would be no process for an individual or organization or anybody else to create a village or sustainable living, because there is no other codes that we have that allows for living facilities.
Councilmember, they would
Temporary
go through a standard review and development process for any other tiny home or smaller scale
We go to tiny
development.
home process.
And Councilman, in the case that it would be not a tiny home, because I do think that there are other provisions for tiny homes, if there's an entity that wants to get into a situation where you have some transitional housing in the same way, we might, as a government, be able to partner with that entity. That was my feeling as we were going into this and looking into this.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Councilwoman Wu, and then-
yeah, I think that, maybe your presentation, or maybe I was just looking at the fact sheet, it says the structures will be allowed for 120 days with an extension for additional 120 days.
I believe that was initially.
Okay,
And
all
That
right.
was changed to 1 year.
So it is 1 year, okay, that's, and these are allowed in any zoning district. It just has to be either on government-owned property or a government partnership. So it could be privately owned property or an entity, LLC, nonprofit that owns it, as long as it's partnered with
The
and has
government,
some
with the city of
relationship.
Kansas City, Missouri, yes. And we did specify that just the city of Kansas City, Missouri, instead of any government entity.
That's what I was going to ask, because I did not go back and see if Jackson County wanted to partner.
No.
Okay.
Well, they couldn't do it on their own. They could do it in a partnership with
Sure.
the city of Kansas City.
Okay.
Councilman Fowler.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And now, after the discussion we had on renewals and so on, I'm confused because 88-370-08-D says temporary government-sponsored shelters are permitted for a period not to exceed 1 year. Permits for temporary government-sponsored shelters may not be renewed or extended. So it looks like from this language, you can only do it for a year and you can't renew or extend it.
Right.
And yet, look, I thought I was hearing discussion that you could wait 30 days and then do it, which seems to me to be preceded or superseded by this language.
So I'm looking at our Director of City Planning and Development, because that gets a little bit more detailed. I don't have everything in front of me. I did understand what you were saying earlier, Director Williams, about the 1 year and being able to extend that.
Yeah, and Councilmember Fowler, you're looking at the proposed ordinance
Yes.
that's drafted through. The versioning I have here has different language. So that's where I need to understand. I'm looking at the language as attached to the agenda package,
Okay.
and it contains.
And that should be the one that you're looking at. That should be the one that we are talking about right now, I believe.
So I just want to get to Councilmember Fowler. He has a version that has different text in it, it sounded like.
I'm looking at the one on Lucy.
That's what I'm looking at too. And that's what,
That's the one that's before us.
It's the one,
so, Mr. Williams, what does your D say? 37008-D, does it provide for an extension?
The version that I have here with D has included not limited to the requirement. It says that the temporary government structured shelters are exempt from the requirements contained in 88-370-05B, including but not limited to the requirement for the 30-day period between the expiration of the initial permit and the extension of the permit. That's what my version has. It sounds like your version has different language.
Yeah, it just,
And
Mine
I'm
does.
sorry, if I may, one more time, the version that's in your language,
here, let me just,
my apologies.
seems like we have two versions out here.
The language that's in the ordinance package is differing from your language. So my feedback was based upon the
That's it.
30-day approval. No, the language you have that is very clear that it cannot be extended.
But why are we voting on this one without the right language?
I think the question is, what's the right language?
Right.
Yeah.
And I would assume that it was the one that's in the packet and not the one that they have in front of them, which was in Lucy. Oh, they were both in Lucy, but one was in the agenda packet and the other one was just in the standalone.
Yeah, I think we have things flowing through Lucy and through Granicus through the new system. There may be differences.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I believe you'd have to go with the version that's in Lucy. You could sub that if you felt like you need to, but the version as I read it in Lucy treats these differently from the regular temporary uses, because those were truly 45 days and they could be renewed. I'm covering for Sarah Baxter, by the way. This is not normally my area, but the way this is written, they're giving a whole year as a temporary use, which goes quite a bit above the normal term for temporary use. Right. And it looks like they did not want this to be able to be renewed, or else you're getting into a permanent situation. They could always apply separately, like he's saying, for a permanent status, but I believe this is a version that was intended, but I can't guarantee that.
And so I would defer to the law department from that perspective. It's a one-year period, and the idea about somebody doing it beyond a year, it becomes something that's permanent, as Guarino has mentioned, and at that point, you go through a different process.
And I'm going to defer to the law department as well, but that was, if we could go with the one that was in the agenda packet that had the correct language.
No, I think the one in Lucy, or the one that we have in the system, is the correct language.
And that's the one that just to be clear, it talks about the 1 year period, no extensions.
Correct. Now, I can't promise, I don't know what conversations there were, who came up with this alternate language. I don't know where that came from, but.
Yeah. Well, and if I don't know exactly what the alternate language, but if it exempts it from the time limits of 370.05, that's kind of what we're doing with saying you have a year and that's it.
Yeah, and
because,
this is clear to me as well. The language
yeah,
is clear.
I think it's probably more clear, because what are the time limits? Are they the 45 days or the ability to renew within 30 days? So I think this is probably more clear the way it's written in the version that we're all looking at.
It is more clear in intent. I think the language that was in this other version we're looking at was the idea of you trying to do multiple renewals, because what we don't want people to do is to use temporary situations and put something in place and kind of keep going and going and going. That's why for all the other temporary uses, there's a 30-day pause and separation period. But the language in your version is clearer. It's 1 year flat.
And for example, like if we're talking about other temporary uses, whether it's a Christmas tree lot or a summer like outside patio thing, you have like 3 or 4 months, then you have a break, and then you may have something else.
So that's exactly, if you're looking at 88-370-04 about the uses, time limits. It's carnivals, it's Christmas tree stands, it's construction yards and offices, temporary sales facilities, mobile vendor parks, think food trucks, things of that nature that you get for a 45-day period. But just to convey the idea that this will not keep going on, we require a break.
Right.
To ask for the same permit, you have to wait 30 days to ask for that same permit to be issued again.
Okay.
I'm a little confused, but
I think the language before us is the better language, before us right here.
Right. And we're willing and ready to do whatever you all
Councilman
approve.
Ellington is,
No, I don't have a problem with the language before us, because that's the reason I articulate that concern, because it would make the ordinance, in my opinion, a waste of time. If we're going to do temporary shelters in which you cannot extend it past a year, what would be the point of doing it? If we can do it and it extends past a year, then the language would actually be problematic in relation to other entities that's trying to do it. But the ordinance only allows temporary government-sponsored shelters, with the ideal underneath this that it can only last for a year, which I have no problem with the way the language reads, because I'm going to be no, because in my opinion, it doesn't make sense. It's like you're thinking of something without actually putting the effort in to ensure that all your I's and Ts and all of that good stuff is dotted and crossed. So I appreciate the conversation, though, because it definitely shows dysfunctionality in coordinating best practices when it comes to temporary shelters and our standard procedures and protocols.
I guess the one thing that I read is that only we can do it.
Only we can do it.
And the fact that we can do it, I mean, and I get you only want them to happen for a year, but I also think that, you know, the pandemic may jump back up again, and with the way this reads, we can't extend the temporary housing for there, right at that point. I guess we could always
Amend that.
amend the ordinance and.
And if I don't want to cut you off, but I think this is not the ideal solution for our unhoused population. Because they're meant to be temporary. Hopefully we can come up with a better solution. If we get to a situation where, you know, we have another phase of COVID, I certainly hope we don't, we need to start thinking about more permanent situations and looking long-term. And so I think we have to come back to the table and start rethinking this. But, I mean, these don't have cooking facilities inside them. You know, they're very small. It's not a permanent situation, and I hope we're not looking at this as a long-term solution.
No.
And maybe it's more of the tiny homes. Do we need to look at that? So in a year, do we transition into more of a tiny home situation like, you know, VCP, although that is more transitional as well. But we've got to move to something, you know, this is an interim solution. It's meant to be temporary. And I think that's why maybe we don't want to allow ourselves, even as a governmental entity, to have it more than a year, because then we'll just kick the can down the road.
Councilwoman Boo, that's what it looks like now, though. If the facilities don't have access for running water, so if you don't have running water, you don't have toiletry. That's why they have a common shared area. Then that also brings another sanitation issues, because you have to remove that. We're not talking about tanks out there or anything like that, nor is that in here. And when we look at the other language when it comes to sanitation removal, whether that's physical waste or trash waste or what have you, there's other things. So what I'm saying is it definitely looks like we're kicking it down the road, and I prefer that if we do anything, we actually do it structurally right. If we're going to do tiny homes or tiny facilities, let's don't do it to appease the media. Let's actually do it so we can actually have a permanent solution. And this right here, in my opinion, is extremely sloppy ordinance because it doesn't have any type of scope of longevity or functionality when it comes to our other correlating ordinances. So I'm definitely a no. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. It doesn't even read good.
If I can add, Councilwoman, this is supposed to be very temporary. This is just one piece of the puzzle when we're talking about moving people from out of the woods, out of tents, into something that is a lot more secure, having someplace where they can go and secure their things, someplace that's safe and secure, and then with those wraparound services be able to move them from that situation in the pallet shelter onto something that is more stable. It is only one piece of the puzzle. We're going to have a variety of methods and solutions, just as you heard earlier with the Veterans Project piece, and then with the other programs that are out there. This is only one part of a very broad and in-depth resolution to houselessness, which is going to be something that we are going to have to visit over and over again for a while.
Well, did you get a copy of this? And just to be clear of what is actually in the system.
This is what's in the system.
Yeah.
I want the system, yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so bringing it back to the committee here.
Chairman,
Yeah.
may I inquire?
Yes, yes, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Gilmore, here's one concern I have. Is there any kind of a notice requirement anywhere to the surrounding landowners if we are to put one of these facilities, for lack of a better term there? Are the surrounding landowners given any, or required to be given any kind of a notice?
That wasn't a part of this particular piece here, but we have been, that's been in the plan to notify. And I can, if I can also, you have another question, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to ask Mr. Williams if he could.
Just double checking through 88370, we do not have notice requirements as it relates to any of our temporary uses.
That gives me a problem because I would think the surrounding, I mean, I can get it for a 2-week deal, but for a 1-year deal, I would think the surrounding landowners should be given some kind of a notice that this is going to be coming.
We would definitely do that, even though it's not required of us. That's just part of what we would definitely, we would have to do that.
Well, if we're going to do an ordinance, my opinion is we ought to put that in there.
And what is the notification requirement now? Within 300 feet of the?
Yeah, it'd be 300 feet, yeah.
And I think Mr. Williams said that we don't usually have notification for
other
temporary uses.
Yeah, there's not a set notification requirement.
Yeah, but the other temporary uses are a lot more temporary.
Oh, not contradicting you, council member, just indicating that
Understand.
for the other uses. Mm-hmm.
All right, what are we looking to do here? I think all of us know and understand that we need to get moving on doing something for a houseless population at this point. What that is kind of where we're doing. Councilwoman Lure had her hand up.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree, we have to do something. I'm not sure this is the right thing to do because of a lot of things, mostly sanitary conditions that will arise with this. And I agree with Councilman Fowler. I think we need to make sure everybody around knows that they're going to, I see what problems we're having in the hotels now with a lot of various crimes. We had a rape last night in one of the hotels in by the airport. So we've had a lot of theft, a lot of, so I don't want to push that into the neighborhoods any more than it is. I'm wondering if, and we've spent a lot of money on this stuff so far, why wouldn't we look at, you know, one of the old hotels and convert that into a place for the folks that need it? That, I mean, we probably could have, for what we've spent now, we probably could have bought one and finished it and maybe, you know, the Adams Mark out I-70 out there. I think it's probably for sale. I mean, there's several that would qualify for that. And the plumbing's right in the room. I mean, you've got rooms there you can put people in, and the kitchens and everything else. I just think if we're kicking the can down the street, that's what we're doing here. I know we caused the problem ourselves, so we got to now fix it. And I think we're just going to have continued problems with the citizens of our city doing this, but that's just my opinion. Any
other comments, questions, or
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, at a minimum, I would propose a committee substitute that in section 88-370-08, I'm looking to Mr. Guarino to draft it, that there be a subsection E that would say all property owners within 300 feet should be given notice of the plan to put one of these temporary uses there.
Can I just follow up on that? I mean, generally, when we provide notice, there's an opportunity to testify. I mean, is it just, then they're going to come, notice of it occurring, and then they'll have an opportunity to email staff or their city council members? Is that, I mean...
I think they're going to testify. It may not be
yeah,
a public
they are.
event. They're going to testify.
But I mean, I'm just, I just, you know, because I think that's the second part is there's really not going to be, it's not going to be the normal development process where a plan comes back and, you know, we will take testimony based upon the notice and opportunity to be heard, so.
Yeah, and I'm really thinking just in terms of actual notice, that they should have, it's like anything else, you know, somebody's going to build something next to your house, you ought to get notice of it. That's what ought to happen here. Now,
So-
whether we have a hearing or not, no, probably not, because we're not talking about a permanent situation.
Right.
I'm sorry, if I may, through the chair, Councilman Fowl, notification looking like potentially who might be operating the shelter, contact information, those kinds of basics for somebody who's a property owner, things of that type, if it's a layout or a diagram of what the development would look like, but at least some contact information. So if someone is notified of what's going to happen and there's an issue, they have a way to contact the operator and things of that nature.
Maybe like the community engagement part of, you know, when we start the development process, you know, information on, you know,
I can tell you who they're going to contact. You, me, him, and him.
And me.
That's who they're going to
I've gotten
contact.
calls as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that has the contact information, and if there's a, you know, any plan.
I'm going to direct them all to you.
That's fine. That's fine. It's been my life for the last 60 days. I'm good.
You just thought you wanted to come back, didn't you?
Oh, I know. I definitely love this. I really do.
You just said that in the past tense, you know.
No, and whatever you all decide that we need to do regarding notification would be fine. Like I said, that is something that we are planning to do once the location is identified, and what would probably be done as if for anyone else, we would definitely want, if we did partner with Jackson County or some other entity, we would encourage those folks to also notify anyone that is within the area. There will be pushback. There always is going to be pushback. I knew this my last time here, but anytime you talk about homeless people, everyone is good and wants to help, but as long as they stay out of their neighborhoods, out of their backyards, then, you know, it's okay. But that's not really realistic, and we keep bumping up against the opposition, and we need to really start bumping up against those people that are going to support this, or anything that has to do with our houseless population. It's a little discouraging being on this end, trying to do something that's good for the residents of our community. The houseless are residents of the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and they should be given the same rights and privileges as all the other people that are in our boundaries. I'm just hoping that we can do something that's a little bit more innovative than what we ever have done, and then fast forward, start to have those conversations that would bring us to solutions that would better serve this population.
So what I want to be clear of is that Fowler's, if we're going to move forward, Fowler's is got some language that is.
And Mr. Chairman, if I can, because Councilmember Boo had suggested about the public engagement ordinance and the notifications within those, I went into our ordinance online, and the notice for those meetings, the things that You inform people of just a description of the project. If anybody has any questions about the project, who should contact, name, phone number, email address. That's just some of the basics that we have for public engagement process.
That would be fine. And do it 30 days before you start installing.
How many days?
I said 30, it
30?
could be 45, but 30 seems.
And Councilman Fowler, can I, because I'm thinking about an emergency, so long-term, we would love to use these pallets when there is a natural disaster, tornado, maybe even a fire at someone's home. If they wanted to stay close to their property, these shelters could be used for that purpose. So I'm thinking about, in that respect, maybe the 30 days would not be appropriate, but if there is a way to make provisions for something like that, and we're not talking about right now, but I'm thinking long-term.
Well, in that respect, 2 hours may be too long.
True.
So, I don't want to legislate in this context
Sure.
for an emergency situation like that. I think, because that's not what we're trying to do here.
Sure.
And the mayor has other emergency powers that he can use.
That's
as
correct.
director
Sorry.
of
Yes,
health.
yes.
So we cross that bridge when we get there. But
Absolutely.
in other words, if that happens, we'll think of something.
Okay.
But for right now, I think this is the position we're in. And if we're going to put one of these projects or developments or shelter sites, I think the surrounding landowners need to know what's coming 30 days in advance and what it's going to look like and who to call.
Yeah, particularly one that's going to be more of a
bigger one.
bigger one, village kind of situation. All right, anyone else? Comments, questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
is it okay if I get with Jeff Williams after for the exact language he's pulling from other parts of the code? I got the gist of it, the 30-day notice.
And Joe, it'd be looking in 88-505-12C. There's a public engagement process, and there are subsections in there talk about required public meeting notice. I think we'd be pulling language out of that. But again, I think it is very much in alignment with the form that we use currently that for public engagement that really is just a description of the property and who to contact with any questions about the development. That's what the base notice is. It is a meeting notice, I will say. That's what we said to people, say, something is happening at this location, this is what it is, here's who you contact with more questions, and that's for the purpose of meeting. I think that information would be baseline for notification of something happening. To the point mentioned by the committee earlier, this would not be a part of a public hearing process.
Right. Okay, is there anything else? We'll see if there's any public testimony for ordinance number 210463.
There's no written testimony on this ordinance.
And I'm trying to check on, let's see.
No one on Zoom?
No raised hands on Zoom, Mr. Chair.
Sounds good. We'll bring it back to committee and see
All right.
what's the pleasure.
I will move committee substitute for ordinance number 210463 with the addition of a section entitled notice or regarding notice discussed and raised by Councilman Fowler and recommend do pass.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that, you did say committee sub.
I did say,
Committee
I said a
substitute.
lot, but I think I did say committee sub.
Well, I'll just say committee substitute. It's been moved and seconded that the committee substitute for ordinance number 210463 be reported out of committee with a recommendation of due pass. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No.
3 ayes, 2 nays. Ordinance passes to the full council. We'll hear it next week.